Devontae Brooks stood frozen as the security alarm blared. Not because he stole, but because the store clerk refused to believe his MIT ID was real. Cameras rolled. Bystanders whispered. His hoodie, his skin, his silence, all on trial. The police stepped in, hand already on the cuffs. And that's when Devontae opened his bag. And everything changed. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Devontae Brooks didn't choose the back row because he liked hiding. He chose it because he knew what came with being seen. Room 302 of Langston Hall was air-conditioned, sterile, and humming with silent judgment. It was the first day of Calculus 2, a prerequisite for most STEM majors at the elite Southern University, and already the front 2 rows were filled with polished students armed with MacBooks, pastel notebooks, and the kind of confidence bred from private school pedigrees. Devontae slipped into the last seat by the window. Hood up, eyes down, second-hand backpack slung across his shoulder like a weight he had learned to carry. No one turned to look at him. Not really. A few students spared him a glance, a passing scan, an unconscious assessment, then turned back, returning to conversations about internships, fraternities, and weekend lake houses. He liked it that way. Invisibility was armor. But Devontae wasn't invisible to everyone. Dr. Wallace Creed, a man who prided himself on discipline through precision, stood at the front with a silver-tipped marker and narrowed his gaze like a hawk scoping for weakness. A tall, lean white man with crisp hair and even crisper opinions, he had long grown bored of teaching undergrads, especially the ones who needed catching up. Let's make one thing clear, Dr. Creed's voice sliced through the air like chalk on glass. This is not remedial math. This is calculus. If you're not ready, drop this course now. He let his eyes sweep over the room, stopping just a second too long on Devontae. It wasn't obvious enough to call racist, but Devontae felt it. That stare, the kind that reduced him to a probability, a misplaced statistic, a question mark in a sea of exclamation points. The kind that said, you don't belong here. Not really. Devontae didn't flinch. He'd seen that look his whole life. As class began, the pace was brutal from the first equation. Dr. Creed filled the board with nested functions, and limits stacked like staircases with no end. Students scrambled to keep up. Devontae didn't move. His notebook stayed closed. His eyes, however, absorbed everything, calmly, sharply, like a chess player watching the early moves of an overconfident opponent. What the others didn't know, couldn't know, was that Devontae had already solved the problems. Creed was presenting. 3 years ago. In a foster home library, with no internet, and half a textbook missing its cover. But he didn't raise his hand. He didn't speak. He watched. And Dr. Creed watched him. By week 2, the pattern had begun. Every class, Dr. Creed found a reason to call on Devontae. Always for the trickiest problems. Always prefaced by a smirk or a warning. Let's see if Mr. Brooks has been keeping up. Or maybe we need a different pace for our back row philosopher. When Devontae answered correctly, which he always did, the professor rarely acknowledged it. Sometimes he'd nod without looking. Other times he'd rephrase Devontae's answer and give credit to the next student who echoed it. The class picked up on the energy, not overtly, but subtly. Devontae felt the gap widening. A cough here, a quiet laugh there, students leaning toward one another and whispering when he raised his hand. One girl even asked if he was an athlete sitting in the wrong lecture. He wasn't. He was a mathematician. But no one had asked. His clothing didn't help. Thrifted jeans, a rotating collection of 3 plain hoodies, shoes that had been worn to the edge of their soles. On a campus where wealth was as loud as the designer logos on backpacks, Devontae moved like static on a polished screen. Still, he kept coming, kept sitting, kept scribbling in his notebook during lunch breaks, under trees, in the library corners. Pages and pages of abstract equations, proofs that spiraled like galaxies, ideas that hadn't even made it to academic journals yet. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to solve something no one had solved. By the 3rd week, Dr. Creed's tone shifted. Now the questions were designed to humiliate. Problems from graduate-level textbooks. Questions that weren't about testing knowledge, but exposing flaws. Devontae stayed silent during most, not because he couldn't answer, but because he sensed the trap. Still, every silence was met with a pointed comment. Not feeling confident today, Mr. Brooks. Or worse, let's move on. That might be above our level. The microaggressions came in sugar-coated barbs. He was never outright insulted, just slowly cut down by 1,000 small digs. It was death by implication. Some classmates noticed. A few even looked uncomfortable. But no one spoke up. No one wanted to be next. Then came the moment everything changed. It was a Friday. The class was packed. Over 150 students. The room brimming with pre-exam tension. Dr. Creed walked in late, carrying a USB stick and an arrogant smile. "Pop quiz," he said flatly. "One question. Solve it and you pass today's lecture. Fail it and, well, don't fail." He plugged in the USB. The projector lit up with an equation most of the class had never seen before. A monstrous integral that spanned 2 lines, symbols stacked on top of symbols. It looked more like art than math. Whispers rippled through the lecture hall. "That's not from our textbook." "Is that real? Wait, what even is that?" Dr. Creed turned around, marker in hand. "This," he said slowly, "is a variant of the Miller-Fock transform. A classic. Most of you won't solve it. But I'd like a brave volunteer." No one moved. Then his eyes landed on the back row.
"Mr. Brooks," he said, voice sharp with faux invitation.
"Why don't you come down and give it a shot?" Every head turned. Devante didn't move. "I insist," Creed added, louder now. "If you've truly been understanding the material, this should be stimulating." Devante stared at the screen. He recognized the form immediately. It wasn't from any textbook. It was from an obscure academic forum he used to browse in public libraries. He remembered it. Not just the solution, but the flaw hidden in the way the problem had been constructed. He stood slowly, backpack still on, no expression. As he walked down the steps, a few students laughed. Someone muttered, "This is gonna be brutal." He reached the board, picked up the marker. "Any questions?" Creed asked, tone mocking. Devante didn't answer. He simply started writing. Silent, focused, the marker moving with sharp purpose. One line, then another, then a pause, and a sudden shift in the board's direction. He wasn't just solving the integral. He was reframing it, reversing the substitution, introducing a new function that simplified the base. The room fell quiet. The energy changed. By the 7th line, a gasp. By the 9th, dead silence. And then, in 10 lines, he stopped, capped the marker. Turn. The solution was perfect. Elegant. Unorthodox. But undeniably correct. Creed's face was frozen. Devante said nothing. He didn't need to. But before he could return to his seat, Dr. Creed spoke, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "That was suspiciously fast." The silence shattered. "Are you sure you didn't see this problem before?" The words weren't casual. They were accusatory, coded in disbelief. Devante's jaw clenched. Creed wasn't congratulating him. He was accusing him of cheating. The next class, Dr. Creed accuses Devante of cheating and files an academic integrity report. Silence clung to the lecture hall like fog. Devante stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, having just dismantled an advanced mathematical problem that most in the room couldn't even read, let alone solve. His strokes were clean, deliberate. The final line rested on the board like a quiet rebellion, not just a solution, but a declaration. But instead of applause, recognition, or even quiet nods of respect, all he received was suspicion. "That was suspiciously fast," Dr. Wallace Creed repeated, lips curling with a smile that had no joy in it. "Are you sure you didn't see this problem before?" He didn't say cheater, but the air in the room tightened as if he had screamed it. Devante turned slowly, still holding the capped marker. His eyes met Dr. Creed's, calm, unblinking. He didn't respond. There was no need to. The answer was obvious to anyone who had paid attention. But no one ever really did. The students murmured among themselves, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked impressed. Others wore smirks that said, "Yeah, right." A few looked away, unwilling to witness what they knew was about to come. Dr. Creed stepped forward, tapping the keyboard to shut off the projector. "That's all for today. We'll resume next week. And Mr. Brooks," he paused, tone hardening into ice, "I'd like a word after class." Devante nodded once and returned to his seat, walking through a gauntlet of eyes. No high fives, no congratulations, just curiosity, coded in quiet doubt. When the hall emptied out, Dr. Creed closed the door behind the last student and turned sharply. "Sit," he said. Devante remained standing. Dr. Creed exhaled sharply. "You're good, But not that good. That problem isn't in our curriculum. Not in any prep material. And you solved it like someone who's seen it 100 times. Devante tilted his head slightly. Or like someone who understands math. Creed's lips tightened. Watch your tone. I didn't know understanding was a tone. A moment passed. The tension was thick enough to crack chalk against. Dr. Creed leaned against the desk, arms folded. Look, I don't care where you learned it. Reddit, YouTube, some math prodigy Discord server. But presenting someone else's work as your own in my class isn't just dishonest, it's unethical. I didn't present anyone else's work, Devante replied, voice even. I solved the problem, my way, in front of everyone. You manipulated it, reversed substitution. Most students your level don't even know how to approach that method. Maybe most students your level haven't had to. Dr. Creed's jaw twitched. You think you're clever, he said softly, but you don't get to outshine this department with shortcuts. I know students like you, always looking for a way around the system. There is no system, Devante shot back. Just gatekeepers. Creed's expression darkened. The quiet racism in his voice turned sharper now, bolder behind closed doors. You come in here, hood up, quiet as a shadow, barely contributing, and now suddenly, you're Einstein with a pencil. No, I don't buy it. Devante stared him down. You didn't buy it because you never thought I could afford it. Creed stepped forward. This isn't about race. It never is, until it is. The silence that followed was different now. Heavy, revealing. Creed looked at Devante like a puzzle he didn't like the answer to. He had expected confusion, maybe embarrassment, but not defiance, not intelligence wrapped in poise. Without another word, Devante turned and walked out. By Monday morning, the entire class had seen the footage. Someone had secretly recorded the moment. The equation, the solve, the stunned silence. A short clip of Devante at the board had made its way onto campus forums with the caption, "Back row kid goes full Goodwill hunting." It wasn't viral in the celebrity sense, but it was viral enough. Students whispered in elevators, DM'd theories, speculated if Devante had cheated, or if he was some kind of savant. Most had never even spoken to him, but now he was suddenly a subject. Devante ignored it all. He didn't come for fame. He came for math. But that Tuesday when he walked into Langston Hall again, something was different. On the screen at the front of the lecture hall wasn't an equation. It was a message. Academic integrity notice. Subject Devante Brooks. Unauthorized source use investigation. Gasps echoed. Phones went up. Even the TA looked confused. Dr. Creed entered moments later, his pace slow, deliberate. I'd like to take a moment, he began, to address a situation that concerns the academic integrity of this course. Devante froze in place. Creed continued, his voice like polished stone. Last week Mr. Brooks solved a problem that, to be frank, was beyond the scope of this class, and most of this department. Initially I was impressed. However, he paused for effect upon review. The methodology matched closely with a solution posted online in a mathematics forum several years ago. A solution authored by someone with a graduate-level background. The room turned to Devante. This raises questions, Creed said, looking directly at him now. Serious questions. Devante's breath slowed. He wasn't shocked. He had felt it coming. The setup. The weaponization of doubt. He stood slowly, eyes level with Creed. You think I plagiarized a solution I never read, using a method I developed myself? You can claim that, Creed replied, to the academic board. A formal report has been filed. The humiliation wasn't loud, it was surgical. I didn't cheat, he said clearly. That's for the board to decide, Creed replied, turning away. Devante's fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't education, it was execution masked as protocol. He walked out, silent. Again, but this time, the silence followed him. He said. That night, he returned to the tiny dorm he shared with 2 other students, both of whom barely acknowledged his existence. He dropped his bag, sat on his bed, and opened his notebook. Pages of equations stared back at him. Pages he'd filled before that problem ever touched the projector. Pages that could prove everything, but only if someone believed him. He flipped to a page near the back. A set of notes scribbled in midnight ink. Formulas. Derivations. A personal theory he'd been building silently for months. Then, a thought. He turned on his old cracked laptop, pulled up a long dormant math forum he used to browse back in Atlanta's public libraries. He searched for the problem Creed had accused him of stealing. There it was. The original post. Anonymous. But as he scrolled, he froze. One of the usernames responding to the thread looked familiar. Not from the forum. From Langston Hall. Dr. Creed. Creed had commented under a pseudonym, but Devontae recognized the writing style, the exact phrasing he used in class, and the date on the comment. 5 years ago, before Devontae had even entered high school. It wasn't just that Creed had seen the problem. He had posted it. He'd recycled a problem from an old academic forum, expecting no one would recognize it, and used it as bait. But Devontae had, because long before this university, before the accusations and silence, he'd been reading those threads by candlelight in foster homes, solving them not for grades but for escape. Creed had unknowingly set a trap for himself. Devontae prints the forum post, circles the username, and begins drafting a formal appeal to the board, not just to clear his name, but to expose Dr. Creed's deception. The night bled into morning, but Devontae Brooks didn't sleep. The glow of his laptop lit the room in cold light, reflecting in his tired eyes. On the screen sat the post that could end his nightmare, or ignite a bigger one. The same unsolved equation Creed had thrown at him in class was right there. Time-stamped 5 years earlier, on an obscure mathematics forum, but what mattered most wasn't the problem itself, it was the small, nearly forgotten comment below it, written by a user named W. Creed. Devontae leaned closer, scrolling through the thread again, pulse steady but slow. The comment style was unmistakable, overly precise, faintly condescending, the same clipped rhythm he'd heard every Tuesday and Thursday morning. It wasn't just an echo of Dr. Creed's tone, it was him. The phrasing, the spacing, even the way he punctuated equations with periods as if each symbol were a sentence. Devontae whispered to himself, barely audible. He posted it. Himself. He sat back, heart thudding. The realization was sharp and cruel. The problem Creed had accused him of plagiarizing wasn't stolen. It had been borrowed, repackaged, and weaponized. Creed had set a trap without realizing the bait was his own creation. But proving that truth would not be easy. Creed wasn't just a teacher. He was tenured, respected, protected. The system didn't punish men like him. It fortified them. Devontae printed the thread, circled the username, and tucked the pages into his notebook. Every action was deliberate, controlled. He wasn't angry, not outwardly. Anger made noise. He'd learned early that silence was stronger. Silence made people uncomfortable. At dawn, the campus was quiet. Mist rolled across the quad as Devontae walked toward the library, hoodie drawn tight against the morning chill. He moved with purpose, his steps echoing against the pavement. Inside, he found an empty study room, pulled out his worn spiral notebook, and began organizing everything: the printout, the class notes, the problem he'd solved on the board. His plan wasn't revenge. It was survival. He drafted a letter to the Academic Integrity Board. Calm, factual, and methodical. He didn't accuse, he presented, each sentence built carefully on evidence. His handwritten derivations dated weeks before Creed's challenge. His library computer login history showing sessions on the same math threads long before the assignment existed. The time-stamped forum post connecting Creed directly to the problem. By mid-morning, the letter was sealed and hand-delivered to the department office. The secretary, a polite woman with silver hair and tired eyes, took it without question. "I'll make sure the chair sees this," she said gently. Her tone carried something that wasn't pity, but recognition, the kind reserved for someone who's seen this story before, and already knows how it ends. Devontae nodded, thanked her, and left. The following days stretched thin. In class, whispers trailed him like shadows. Is he really under investigation? I heard Creed found proof. Apparently he used AI to cheat. That's what someone said. Devontae kept walking. He didn't look up, didn't respond, didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Every whisper was another needle in the same wound, one that didn't bleed, but festered. Dr. Creed, meanwhile, had perfected the art of performative neutrality. He carried himself as though burdened by duty, occasionally referencing academic honesty in class lectures that sounded more like sermons. Integrity, Creed declared one morning, pacing before the whiteboard, is not about talent, it's about trust. Once that's gone, no equation can fix it. He said it without looking at Devontae, but everyone knew who the sermon was for. Devontae's pen froze mid-note. Racism didn't always come wearing slurs or overt hostility. Sometimes it wore a tie, and spoke through policy. Sometimes it came in the form of a lecture about standards. After class, he gathered his things quietly, when a voice called out from behind him. "Hey," said a girl, a sophomore named Lila Weston, who sat near the front. "I watched that video. You were incredible." Devante looked at her, cautious. "I just wanted to say," she continued, fumbling with her bag strap. "Whatever's going on, it's wrong. You didn't deserve that." He nodded once. "Thanks." It wasn't much, but it was the first time anyone had said something out loud. For a moment, he thought maybe the tide could shift. Maybe truth could survive in a place like this. He was wrong. That Friday, an email arrived in his inbox at 6. Subject: Academic Integrity Hearing Notification. Devante Brooks. Date Monday 10 a.m. Location: Langston Hall. Room. He read it twice, then a third time. A hearing. That word wasn't neutral. It wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict waiting for justification. By the weekend, he could feel the isolation tightening. Messages left unread. Group projects suddenly reassigned. Study partners withdrawing with excuses that sounded rehearsed. The few classmates who once nodded in greeting now pretended not to see him. He'd been socially erased. The injustice wasn't just in the accusation. It was in the quiet compliance of everyone around it. Sunday night, he walked past the math department office on his way back to his dorm. Through the frosted glass, he could see Creed inside, talking to another faculty member. Laughter, a pat on the back, papers exchanged. For a brief second, their eyes met through the glass. Creed's smile didn't falter. It was the smile of a man who believed the system belonged to him. Devante didn't stop walking. But inside, something shifted. A quiet steel hardened beneath the exhaustion. If they wanted silence, he would give them precision. Monday morning came heavy with rain. The sky was a dull bruise. Room 214 smelled faintly of coffee and carpet glue. A long oak table dominated the center, surrounded by 5 faculty members, 3 professors, a student representative, and the board chair, Dr. Mildred Hayes, a woman known for her clinical detachment. Dr. Creed was already seated. His posture was immaculate, his expression crafted. In front of him, a thin folder, neat, organized, damning. Devante entered quietly, placing his own binder of evidence on the table. His clothes were simple, pressed, clean. "Mr. Brooks," Dr. Hayes began, "you've been accused of academic dishonesty regarding your solution to a calculus problem presented in Dr. Creed's course. You'll have the opportunity to respond after the statement of evidence." Creed cleared his throat. "The evidence is straightforward," he said smoothly. "The solution Mr. Brooks presented matches a derivation found on an online forum. The structure, sequence, and substitutions are nearly identical. It is unlikely this alignment occurred by chance." He slid a few printouts forward, carefully curated screenshots that cut off timestamps and usernames. Hayes nodded. "Mr. Brooks, your response." Devante opened his binder. The first page showed his handwritten derivation, complete with date stamps from weeks before the incident. The next, his login record from the library system. And then the printed forum thread. He tapped the username WCreed72. "This account posted the original problem 5 years ago," he said evenly. The writing style, the notation, and even the formatting matched Dr. Creed's academic publications from that year. The room stilled. Creed's fingers twitched, just slightly. Hayes leaned forward. "You're alleging that Dr. Creed himself posted the problem you're accused of plagiarizing." "I'm not alleging anything," Devante replied. "I'm showing it." He slid forward the final page, a cross-comparison of Creed's published paper from 2018 and the forum post, identical phrasing in 2 sentences. For the first time, Creed's composure cracked. "This is absurd," he snapped. "Anonymous posts prove nothing. Anyone could imitate language." Hayes looked between them, silent. The other board members exchanged uneasy glances. The meeting stretched for over an hour. Questions, rebuttals, evidence dissected line by line. Devante never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The truth carried its own weight. When it ended, Hayes closed her folder. "We'll review and notify you of the decision in writing," she said. Devante nodded, gathered his things, and left. Outside, the rain had stopped. The campus shimmered with puddles, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. He walked toward the library steps, slow and steady. A group of students passed by, whispering. He caught fragments. Guess he's out. Creed's not gonna lose that battle. Man, they always think they can beat the system. He kept walking. His phone buzzed. An email from Academic Integrity Board. Subject, notice of temporary suspension pending final decision. His breath caught. They hadn't waited to review anything. The verdict was already written. Devante stands in the rain, reading the words temporary suspension. Beneath them, a line in bold. Failure to attend disciplinary hearing within 7 days may result in permanent expulsion. Langston Hall, room 209, was nothing like a courtroom. But it might as well have been. The air inside was clinical, the temperature deliberately neutral, the walls blank except for a framed university crest, a symbol of legacy that meant different things to different people. At one end of the long table sat Devante Brooks, alone. At the other, 3 members of the Academic Integrity Board, all white, all tenured, all seasoned in the rituals of institutional process. Between them sat a manila folder. Inside, his fate. Mr. Brooks, please confirm your understanding that this is an official disciplinary hearing under Section 6 of the university's Code of Academic Conduct, said Dr. Jonathan Wells, the chair, without looking up from the typed script. I understand, Devante answered quietly. To his right sat Dr. Linda Harkness, a statistics professor known for her rigid adherence to rules. To his left, Dr. Barrett Long, whose reputation for neutrality was matched only by his absence of empathy. Devante sat straight, his backpack beside him, his hands folded in his lap. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't sweating. But his chest felt tight, like something heavy was balanced on his ribs, refusing to let air flow naturally. Across the room, Dr. Creed entered, carrying a leather binder. He nodded curtly to the board, ignoring Devante completely. He sat with the smooth, practiced ease of someone who'd been in rooms like this before, just never on trial. Wells adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Let's begin with the summary of the violation. Dr. Creed opened his binder. On March 7th during Calculus 2 lecture, Mr. Brooks presented a solution to an unsolved integral that bore uncanny similarity to a known derivation found on a mathematics forum. The solution's structure, phrasing, and notation were not consistent with undergraduate instruction, nor were they previously taught in this course. Given the timing, I submitted a formal concern regarding potential academic dishonesty. His words were clipped, authoritative, measured. They weren't accusations, they were verdicts wearing the costume of objectivity. Dr. Harkness scribbled notes. Dr. Long nodded slowly. No one asked how the forum post had surfaced. No one questioned why a professor would use a problem from an uncredited online source. Wells turned to Devante. Mr. Brooks, your response? Devante opened his binder, pulling out his meticulously prepared materials. The first page, his handwritten notes, time-stamped and signed by a university librarian weeks before the incident. The second, his login records from the library's public terminals, showing his activity on the forum long before the lecture. I didn't copy the solution, Devante said calmly. I derived it myself. I've been working on problems like this for years. This particular one, I recognized it because I'd studied it independently when I was 16. Wells raised an eyebrow. 16? I taught myself advanced calculus while in foster care. I didn't have internet at home, but I used public library computers and wrote everything by hand. I've got notebooks full of equations most students here haven't even seen yet. He reached into his bag and pulled out a beat-up spiral notebook. Pages curled, ink fading. But the math was alive. Beautiful, complex lines of logic that curved like rivers on paper. He placed it in front of them without a word. The board flipped through the pages. None of them spoke, but something shifted in the room. Not trust, but hesitation. Creed leaned forward. Regardless of his personal history, the fact remains, Devante cut in, quietly but firmly. The fact remains that the forum post you claim I copied from was originally made by a user named WCreed72. I printed the thread, the username, the writing style. It matches Dr. Creed's academic publications. He didn't find a plagiarized solution. He recycled his own post and accused me for recognizing it. A silence fell over the room. Wells furrowed his brow. You're suggesting Dr. Creed posted the original equation? I'm not suggesting. I'm stating it. Devante slid forward a side-by-side comparison, one of Creed's published papers from 2018, and the forum post in question. Identical language, same uncommon phrase, non-elementary convergence through nested transformation. The weight of the evidence landed like a hammer on glass. Creed's smile thinned. Are we really letting a student dictate truth here based on internet posts and emotional appeals? Devante locked eyes with him. It's not emotion. It's math. Wells turned to Creed. Dr. Creed, can you confirm whether you have used this forum in the past? Creed didn't answer immediately. I've contributed to several forums over the years. I can't confirm every username. But can you confirm or deny posting this specific problem? Creed's eyes narrowed. I won't respond to conjecture without formal authentication. Which wasn't a denial. It was a retreat. Devante let the silence hold. He knew better than to push further. The truth had already been laid out. Any more would look like desperation. Dr. Harkness tapped her pen. Mr. Brooks, do you have any faculty references who can verify your independent study history? Devante hesitated. No, I don't have mentors here. I don't come from that kind of network. There it was. The real reason this had escalated. Not because of math, but because of structure. Creed had colleagues, students, friends. Devante had proof, but no witnesses. Let me be clear, he added. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equal scrutiny. If you're going to investigate me, then investigate him too. Wells looked up at that. We'll take that under consideration. The board dismissed them briefly, to review the materials in private. Devante waited outside, sitting on a wooden bench in the hallway. His foot tapped the tiles slowly, calm but alert. It wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. If the system worked, he'd be cleared. If it didn't, he'd be erased. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Finally, the door opened. Mr. Brooks, please return. Back inside, the tone had shifted. Not warmer, but more careful. We're extending the review period, Dr. Wells said. There are significant materials here that require verification. During this time, your temporary suspension remains in effect. Creed shifted in his seat but said nothing. You'll receive written notice of the final decision within 5 business days. Devante nodded, gathered his things, and stood. Just as he turned to leave, a voice from the far end of the room interrupted. Wait, said Dr. Harkness, flipping through one of the folders. She pulled out a single sheet and frowned. This isn't part of the hearing file. Wells leaned over. What is it? Harkness held it up. It's from Devante's admissions portfolio. A background file. Wells squinted. Why's that in the academic folder? I don't know. But look at this. She read aloud a line near the top. Applicant was removed from a previous gifted student program for disruptive independence. Devante froze. What gifted program? He asked, confused. Wells motioned for the sheet. Is this accurate, Mr. Brooks? I've never been told that before. I never knew I was in a gifted program. Creed's face went pale. Dr. Harkness kept flipping.
There's more. A recommendation letter. Not from this school. From a public high school teacher in Atlanta. It's glowing. She refers to Devante as a self-trained prodigy with a rare cognitive approach to applied mathematics. Says he was removed from the program due to administrative bias.
Wells looked sharply at Creed. Why wasn't this disclosed in the initial hearing? Creed's mouth opened, but no words came. Did you have access to this file prior to the hearing? Wells pressed. Creed stammered. I reviewed his transcript for the challenge exam. But not personal files. Dr. Harkness folded the file shut. Eyes narrowed. Someone tampered with his records. Devante stares at the board as Dr. Wells demands an internal audit and an investigation into who accessed Devante's childhood records without authorization. For a moment, no one in the room moved. The sound of paper rustling had stopped. The air itself seemed to wait. Dr. Harkness's voice trembled slightly as she reread the last lines of the file. Removed from gifted program due to disruptive independence. Her eyes flicked up to Devante. What exactly does that mean? Devante looked lost. I don't know, he said quietly. No one ever told me I was in a gifted program. I just remember getting pulled out of class one day. They said the program was ending. After that, I was back in regular math. Dr. Wells frowned. Mr. Brooks, where did you go to high school? East Fulton County Public. Devante answered. Atlanta. Do you remember the teacher who wrote this letter? Dr. Harkness asked, tapping the page. He hesitated. Miss Alder. She used to give me old math textbooks from her trunk. I think she knew I didn't have the money to buy my own. Harkness's voice softened. It says here she recommended you for an early college placement test. Devante nodded. She said I could test out of the high school curriculum. I didn't think anyone took it seriously. He didn't add that the week after Miss Alder submitted that paperwork, she was quietly transferred to another district. He had been too young to understand what happened, only that adults whispered, and doors closed where they once opened. Now, years later, the ghosts of those decisions were sitting around a table, wearing suits and authority. Dr. Wells scanned the document again, brows knitting. "There's a second signature here," he murmured. "The program coordinator who removed him." Creed stiffened. He already knew the name. "Dr. Harold Creed," Wells read aloud. "Any relation to you, Dr. Creed?" The room went silent. Devante blinked. "Wait. What?" Creed's voice was careful. "My father administered state education programs for over 2 decades. I wasn't aware of this overlap." Wells looked unimpressed. "Your father was directly responsible for removing this student from an academic advancement program." "It would appear so," Harkness added dryly, flipping another page. "And the justification listed here, attitude incompatible with program standards. That's unusually vague." Creed swallowed. "I assure you my father's decisions were based on professional judgment." Devante's stomach sank. The threads connected themselves in his mind, years apart but unmistakable. The same surname that had signed away his opportunity in Atlanta now stood across from him, accusing him again of what he never did. 2 generations of gatekeepers, wearing the same mask of procedure. He sat perfectly still, but inside, something broke open. Not anger, exactly, but recognition. The cycle wasn't random. It was systemic. Wells exhaled slowly. "We'll note the conflict of interest in our report. Dr. Creed, you'll recuse yourself from all further proceedings related to this case." Creed's jaw tightened. "With respect, I'm the instructor of record. And now a potential witness in an internal ethics review," Wells said firmly. "You'll step out." For the first time, Creed looked rattled. His veneer cracked, a confident posture slipping as he gathered his binder. When he rose, his knuckles were white against the leather cover. He didn't look at Devante when he left. The door clicked shut behind him. The sound echoed. Dr. Harkness turned back to Devante. "We'll need to verify the authenticity of these records. But this changes things." "It shouldn't," he said quietly. "It's just paper." The math didn't change. She studied him for a long moment. "No," she agreed softly. "But the way we see it does." Outside the hearing room, rain streaked across the tall windows like pale threads of ink. Devante sat alone in the hallway, the sound of distant chatter from classrooms leaking through the walls. He thought about Atlanta, the foster homes that came and went, the quiet nights when the city lights flickered through cracked blinds. He used to count the seconds between thunderclaps and call it math. It was the only constant in a world that kept moving him from place to place. At 14, he'd found an abandoned textbook in a donation box. Advanced Calculus, Concepts and Proofs. He couldn't pronounce half the words then, but he read it cover to cover anyway, tracing symbols with his finger until they made sense. Numbers didn't care about race or records, they just were. Clean, honest. He'd spent nights solving problems by flashlight, not to prove anything to anyone, but because the logic made him feel less alone. And now that logic, that honesty was being used against him. The door creaked open behind him. Dr. Harkness stepped out. "They're going to continue deliberating," she said quietly. "You can go for now." He nodded. Standing. "Do I still have to leave campus?" "Technically, yes. The suspension remains in effect until the review concludes." He slung his backpack over one shoulder. "Figures." She hesitated. "Devante, I'm not supposed to say this, but your notebooks, keep them safe. Originals like that matter more than you think." He gave a small, tired smile. "They're all I've got." As he walked down the hall, he passed a cluster of students waiting for office hours. They watched him the way people watch a storm cloud, unsure if it would pass or burst. 2 days later, the internal audit began. The university's records department confirmed that Devante's gifted program documents were indeed real, though archived under a closed state education project. The signature of Harold Creed was verified. More importantly, a note in the digital file confirmed that the removal had been contested by Devante's teacher, the same Miss Alder whose letter still sat in the folder. The revelation sent ripples through the department. What began as an academic dispute now hinted at decades of bias embedded in paperwork. By Thursday morning, the board reconvened in the same cold room. Creed's seat was empty, replaced by an observer from the dean's office. Dr. Wells looked weary. "Mr. Brooks, we've completed our preliminary review. The documentation you provided aligns with institutional records. Given the conflict of interest, we're postponing any disciplinary action until further notice. He paused. You may return to classes effective immediately. Devante blinked. So, I'm cleared? Pending final review, Wells clarified. But yes, for now. A thin victory. Temporary. But still a breath of air after weeks underwater. Thank you, Devante said softly. As he gathered his materials, Dr. Harkness asked, Mr. Brooks, if you don't mind my asking, how did you teach yourself calculus without formal instruction? He looked up, caught off guard by the genuine curiosity. I used to read used textbooks from thrift stores, the ones people threw away. I'd copy the theorems until they made sense. And when they didn't? She asked. He smiled faintly. I found a way to make them make sense. Wells leaned back, studying him. You're aware that kind of self-training is nearly unheard of. I'm aware it's nearly unbelievable, Devante said quietly. That's why no one does believe it. The words lingered. The truth of them was undeniable. Wells closed the folder. We'll be in touch. Devante nodded, turned to leave, and stopped when he saw a figure standing just outside the door. A man in a navy blazer, mid-40s, holding a folder stamped with the seal of another university. He had a calm, confident air, like someone used to moving in rooms that listened when he spoke. Excuse me, the man said politely. Dr. Wells? Yes? I'm Dr. Benjamin Hale, visiting from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I was told I might find you here. The board exchanged startled glances. MIT, Wells repeated. Hale nodded. We've been monitoring academic contributions to open math forums for several years. One user, posting under the handle DB Proofs, caught our attention. The derivations matched patterns unique to advanced mathematical cognition, bordering on theoretical originality. We traced the IP activity to this campus. Dr. Harkness's eyes widened. Are you saying? I'm saying we believe that user is Mr. Devante Brooks, Hale said, turning toward him. And if that's true, we have something to discuss. Devante froze. The world narrowed to the sound of rain tapping the window. Hale opened his folder. Inside were printouts of equations. His equations, the ones he'd posted years ago in public libraries, late at night, under flickering lights. We were preparing to reach out formally, Hale continued, but then we heard about these allegations. We couldn't stay silent. Dr. Wells leaned forward, voice caught between awe and disbelief. You're saying MIT's math division has been following his work? Not following, Hale corrected. Studying. Devante couldn't speak. His throat tightened with disbelief. All those nights in silence, the years of obscurity, the weight of doubt, and somewhere someone had been watching. Dr. Harkness smiled for the first time since he'd met her. Mr. Brooks, she said softly, it appears your story isn't over. Dr. Hale glances down at his phone, frowns, and says, but before we talk scholarships, there's something else you should see. MIT's servers just flagged a new post made under your username last night. From inside this campus, Benjamin Hale stood motionless, as the weight of his words settled into the room. His calm demeanor never shifted, but the gleam in his eyes made clear what he already knew. This wasn't just another transfer prospect. This was a mathematical anomaly, hidden in plain sight. Devante Brooks hadn't moved since hearing Hale's last sentence. You've been studying me? He asked, the words low and cautious. Hale nodded once. For over a year. At first we weren't even sure you were real. Most of the problems you solved, they weren't just complex. They were unresolved. The kind of equations that sit in journals for decades because no one dares touch them. He held up a page. Devante recognized the scrawl immediately. It was his. A proof he'd posted anonymously on a tiny forum, with fewer than 50 users, written late one night between foster home visits. You posted under the name DB Proofs, Hale continued. The algorithms we use for peer monitoring tagged your patterns. The syntax, the way you simplified variables, it was too precise to ignore. Devante swallowed hard. His brain, normally so sharp, felt sluggish under the sudden flood of validation. He'd spent years solving problems in shadows, unheard and unseen. Now the brightest minds in the country were standing in front of him with his equations in hand. And the post from last night? Dr. Wells asked. Hale turned his phone around. A new proof. Short, cryptic, but unmistakably written in Devante's style. That's not mine, Devante said immediately, scanning the math. It looks like my work, but I didn't write that. Wells frowned. So someone's impersonating you. Not impersonating, Devante said slowly. Framing. Dr. Harkness leaned forward. Why now? Why post under his name after he's cleared? Hale looked at Devante. That's what we're here to find out. He lowered his phone, then opened the folder in his hand. Inside was a formal letter, sealed with MIT's insignia. This is a conditional offer, he said. Full tuition scholarship. Research assistantship in our applied mathematics lab. Transfer effective immediately, if you choose. The room fell silent again. Even Wells looked taken aback. You're offering him a full ride? He asked, as though trying to process it. No, Hale corrected. We're offering him a future. Devante stared at the letter. The words were right there, black ink on thick paper. Not a dream, not a maybe. A way out. Not just from this university. From the system. From Creed. From every file that ever said he didn't belong. But he didn't reach for it. I appreciate it, Devante said slowly. But I can't just walk away. Hale tilted his head. You're still suspended. For now. But if I leave now, Creed wins. He gets to call me the student who cracked under pressure. Who ran when things got hard. That's not justice. That's escape. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every sentence was a stone dropped into the center of the table, rippling outward. I want this, he said, nodding at the offer. But not like this. Hale nodded with quiet respect. Then let's make sure you leave the right way.
Wells glanced toward Harkness, then back at Devante. You'll stay on campus. Attend classes. We'll expedite our review of the impersonation post. And if it links back to anyone in our faculty.
He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. By the end of the day, the campus buzzed with whispers. Word spread fast. MIT had come for the kid in the hoodie. The quiet black student no one paid attention to until he humiliated a professor in front of 150 witnesses. Now he was being courted like a rock star. Some students offered congratulations, cautiously, like testing the wind. Others kept their distance, unsure which narrative to believe. But for Devante, none of it mattered. He returned to his dorm quietly, letter still tucked in his binder, unopened since he'd received it. He didn't need to read it again. He knew what it said, what it meant. Still, something gnawed at the edges of his mind. The post from the night before, fake but written in his style. That wasn't random. Someone wanted to re-poison the well. Someone was still trying to ruin him. And he had a strong idea. The next morning, an emergency meeting was called. This time the dean attended in person, along with 2 attorneys from the university's legal team. Dr. Hale was present again, along with Devante, Dr. Harkness, and an IT analyst, brought in to trace the origin of the suspicious post. The analyst spoke quickly, nervously. The post originated from a campus IP address, specifically a staff login from Langston Hall's faculty lounge Wi-Fi. Harkness's pen stopped mid-sentence. Who was logged in at the time? The dean asked. The analyst hesitated. Dr. Wallace Creed. The room exploded in silence.
Hale was the first to speak.
So, the man who accused Devante of fraud used university internet to impersonate him online the night before our meeting. The analyst nodded. Dr. Harkness leaned back. That's beyond academic dishonesty. That's targeted harassment. The dean's face was unreadable. We'll begin formal proceedings immediately. Legal will advise on policy violations. But the next words didn't come from the dean. They came from the door. Don't bother. I'll handle this myself. Everyone turned. Dr. Creed stood at the entrance, briefcase in hand, eyes tired but still burning with stubborn defiance. Dr. Creed, the dean said sharply. You were not invited to this session. I know, Creed said flatly, but I was told by my attorney to deliver this in person. He reached into his case and placed a thick envelope on the table. This is a formal cease and desist notice. If MIT continues contacting students currently enrolled in my class without going through proper university channels, I will pursue litigation for academic interference. Everyone stared at him, stunned. Devante's jaw clenched. You're suing MIT? Harkness asked, incredulous. Creed turned toward Devante. This isn't about you, it's about process, boundaries, authority. Devante stood slowly, walking to the table, picking up the envelope. He held it for a second, then dropped it back with a dull slap. You ruined my future. And now that someone else sees my value, you're afraid they'll prove you were wrong all along. Creed didn't respond. Hale rose next. Let me be perfectly clear, he said to the room. MIT will not be intimidated. We came to recognize brilliance, and will stand behind it with or without this institution's blessing. Creed opened his mouth to speak, but the dean raised her hand sharply.
Enough.
Dr. Creed, please wait outside. He hesitated, then turned and left. The door clicked shut again, louder this time. Harkness turned to Hale. Is the offer still on the table? He looked at Devante. It never left. Devante nodded, slow and steady. Then I accept, after the hearing. Wells looked at him. You're sure? Yes, Devante said, his voice unshakable now. I want to walk out of here, knowing I didn't just survive it. I dismantled it. Outside the building, Creed lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. He hadn't smoked in years, but his nerves needed something steady. His world, his control was unraveling. First the challenge backfired. Then the old forum post came to light. Now MIT had swooped in and made him irrelevant. But it wasn't over. He pulled out his phone and opened a message thread. The contact was unnamed. The messages were short. Creed typed one line. Initiate Plan B. Finalize by Monday. Back in the administration building, the university's legal counsel receives an anonymous tip, a sealed folder labeled Creed's confidential list, left in their mail slot overnight. Inside, dozens of past complaints, all mysteriously buried. The sealed envelope landed on the university legal counsel's desk with no note, no return address, and no explanation. It simply appeared, as if the building itself had birthed it in the night. Inside, a dossier titled Creed's Confidential List. Typed in a sterile font, it contained nearly 20 names. Beneath each one was a brief notation. Grade dispute filed. Complaint of racial bias. Reassigned midterm without explanation. The earliest dated back 12 years. The most recent was Devante Brooks. Every name belonged to a student of color. Every complaint had been quietly closed, dismissed, or rerouted before formal review. By morning, the legal team had escalated the file directly to the dean, and still, the campus carried on, as if nothing was about to change. Word of MIT's offer to Devante spread like fire across campus. First it leaked through the math department, whispered in nervous awe by a TA who'd overheard the meeting. Then it showed up in a group chat screenshot, quickly forwarded, then posted, then deleted, but not fast enough to stop it from multiplying. He's getting a full ride to MIT. They tracked his anonymous math posts. He solved something the whole department couldn't touch. Suddenly, the quiet kid in the hoodie became more than a rumor. He became a phenomenon, an urban legend reshaped in real time, molded by the imaginations of students who had barely noticed him a month ago. But with visibility came division. Some were thrilled. He's a genius. The school should have backed him instead of trying to destroy him. Honestly, the way they handled it says more about Creed than it does about Devante. He deserves to blow up. This is goodwill hunting. But others were skeptical. Or worse, I don't care how smart he is. You don't go around acting like you're better than the professor. He got lucky with one problem, and now he's a celebrity? Let's not pretend like MIT would have cared if he wasn't black. And in between those extremes, a new anxiety spread. What if he was telling the truth the whole time? What did that mean about the faculty? About the system? Some students began digging through their own memories of Creed's class. One remembered being discouraged from challenging a solution on the board. Another recalled a black female student transferring out mid-semester, citing hostility masked as high standards. Whispers turned into threads. Threads turned into screenshots. Stories emerged. Nothing explosive, just enough to raise eyebrows. A pattern became visible, and it wasn't new. But Devante didn't feel vindicated. He felt exposed. He kept his routine tight. Early morning library sessions. No cafeteria. No group work. He showed up to class quietly, sat near the back, and left the moment the lecture ended. The students who once ignored him now offered shy nods or forced compliments. The silence had turned into attention, but it wasn't the kind he wanted. He wasn't a student anymore. He was a symbol. You've become a talking point, said Lila Weston one afternoon. She had approached him again, holding a coffee and hesitating like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to speak. I didn't ask to be, Devante replied. She sat on the edge of a planter, her voice low. Some of the students from your class are forming a support petition. Not just about you. It's about systemic bias, faculty abuse, stuff we've all seen. He stared at the ground. You ever notice how when something goes wrong it becomes everyone's problem? But when you're just trying to survive, "You're invisible." She didn't respond. "I've been here for months," he added. "No one cared about my math then. I care now," she said softly. Devante looked up. There was honesty in her face. Not guilt, but recognition. Still, he shook his head. "I don't need a fan club. I need the truth to hold its weight." But truth, it seemed, had a strange way of leaking. Late one night, a video appeared on a niche student-run Instagram page known for campus gossip. It was blurry, clearly filmed from behind a cracked door. The audio was low, but clear enough. Dr. Creed stood in the faculty lounge, holding a coffee cup, speaking to a group of professors. They were laughing. "MIT thinks they found a hidden genius," Creed said, chuckling. "Please. The kid's a hood ornament. Smart? Sure. But they love a redemption arc. It's easier to pretend he's the next Ramanujan than admit we lower the bar for disadvantaged kids." Another voice asked, "You think he really solved that problem on his own?" Creed shrugged. "I think he's good at mimicry. That's how some animals survive." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was lasting. Within 30 minutes, the video went viral. The caption read, "This is who's teaching us." It was shared in group chats, reposted on TikTok, even quoted on X with the tag "Don Remove Creed." By morning, the administration was in crisis mode. Devante found out when he opened his email and saw nearly 50 unread messages. Journalists, alumni, students he didn't even know. One subject line read, "Your professor just destroyed himself." Thoughts? Another simply said, "They can't bury it now." He didn't reply to any of them. Instead, he closed his laptop and sat still in the quiet of his dorm room, the gray light of morning filtering through half-closed blinds. Outside, he could hear the usual sounds of campus waking up. Footsteps, doors closing, distant voices. He used to want to disappear. Now he couldn't even breathe without being watched. A knock came at the door. 3 short taps. He opened it to find Dr. Harkness standing there, visibly shaken. "You saw the video?" she asked. He nodded. "The dean wants to meet today. Emergency session. They'll likely place Dr. Creed on leave." Devante didn't react. "You don't have to attend," she added. "This can happen without you." He shook his head. "No, I want to be there. If the system's finally cracking, I need to hear it with my own ears." By the afternoon, Langston Hall was electric. Students gathered on the quad. A few held handmade signs, not protest-sized but visible. "Truth, nail, tenure. You tried to erase him. Justice for Devante." Inside the administration building, Creed's office door remained shut. Locked. Silent. But the walls had ears now. As Devante walks toward the dean's emergency session, his phone buzzes with a new anonymous message, a still image of his childhood foster file, stamped confidential and a single line, "We know what you really are." The image had arrived just as Devante reached the building steps. A still shot of an old document from his childhood foster file, stamped confidential in red. Below it, a single typed message, "We know what you really are." He stared at it, motionless. No sender, no context, just cold intent wrapped in digital anonymity. The weight of the message wasn't in what it said, but in what it implied. Someone was digging, not into his math, into him, his past, the parts of his life buried behind social workers, sealed records, and years of silence. But before he could react, the quad exploded. Phones lit up. Voices rose. Students crowded around screens. A sophomore journalism major had reposted the leaked video of Dr. Creed to Twitter, and within an hour the clip was everywhere. What began as a whisper of controversy transformed into a full-blown digital reckoning. Justice for Devante trended by noon. It started on student-run accounts. Then civil rights organizations picked it up. Influencers, athletes, historians, black academics from Ivy League schools, mathematicians from Stanford. Public figures began weighing in with statements of support and threads of outrage. One tweet read, "Devante Brooks isn't the first black student to be humiliated by white academic ego, but he just might be the last they can do it to in silence." Justice for Devante. Another went viral overnight. A black foster kid teaches himself calculus, gets sabotaged by his professor, framed, and still ends up recruited by MIT. This isn't just about racism. This is about resilience they never expected. Thousands retweeted. Thousands more replied with their own stories of being underestimated, sidelined, policed, erased. It wasn't just about Devante anymore. It was about the quiet war so many had fought without witnesses. Back on campus, the administration scrambled. The dean held emergency meetings. Public relations issued a vague statement of values. But it wasn't enough. Corporate sponsors began to pull their funding. Alumni donors issued open letters. A prominent endowment froze its contributions. Until the university addressed the allegation. Every boardroom became a panic room. And Devante, he stayed quiet. The offers poured in. Talk shows, interviews, podcasts, national news outlets. But he turned them all down. Not out of fear, but out of focus. He wasn't done here. Not yet. In his dorm room, Devante stared at the email thread again. "We know what you really are." His eyes narrowed. He traced the file in the photo. It wasn't one he'd ever seen. Not part of the public foster records he accessed during his scholarship applications. This was internal. Deeply sealed. Someone had access. They shouldn't have. And they weren't just trying to hurt him. They were trying to own the narrative. Dr. Harkness called him late that night. Her voice was low. Urgent. "I just saw the file." "You saw it too?" Devante asked, stunned. It was forwarded to the university server anonymously. Legal's panicking. "We're launching a formal breach investigation." Devante exhaled. "I didn't leak it." "I know," she said. "But someone wants it to look like you're hiding something." "What was in it?" There was a pause. Then she said, "A disciplinary note from a temporary guardian. Falsely labeled behavioral misconduct. It was removed from your file years ago." Someone dug it back up. Devante felt the chill in his chest. He knew what this was. It wasn't an attack on his mind. It was an attack on his character. The next morning his name was in every major paper. M&T recruits story sparks national debate over racism in academia. From foster care to calculus genius. Devante Brooks breaks the system. The Guardian. Who gets to be called gifted? One black teen's fight for truth. The Atlanta. But buried beneath the celebration were the first signs of pushback. An anonymous op-ed on a conservative education site claimed Devante's sudden rise was the result of affirmative hysteria, accusing institutions of manufacturing minority geniuses to feed political correctness. Another article questioned whether Devante's MIT offer was more about PR than potential. He read every line, then closed the tabs. The spotlight was never going to be clean. Outside his dorm, the air had changed. Supportive students left sticky notes on his door. Quiet messages like, "We believe you. Thank you for surviving. Don't let them rewrite you." But others weren't so kind. One note read, "Fraudy fame. Classic." Another said simply, "Your turn will come." By evening, campus police had to step in. Not for violence, for volume. A protest had formed outside Langston Hall. Signs waved. Chants echoed. "You teach hate, we teach back." Erase creed, not Devante. This system won't silence us. It wasn't just students of color. It was international students. First-gen scholars. White students, who had been watching and were finally done being quiet. Devante stood across the quad. Hood up, watching. Dr. Hale found him there. "You seeing this?" he asked, walking up beside him. Devante nodded. "I didn't want this, but they did," Hale said. "The ones who came before you, who didn't get this moment." "I'm not a moment." "You're not," Hale agreed. "You're a movement." They stood in silence for a minute. Then Hale added, "But I need you to know something. MIT's offer, it's not a handout. We didn't come here because of headlines. We came because your work demanded it." "I believe you," Devante said. "But right now I need more than a scholarship. I need this school to admit what it tried to bury." Hale nodded. "Then let's make that happen." That night, Devante returned to his dorm to find an envelope under his door. No name. No label. Inside, a single printed page. Typed in all caps, "Leave campus or else. You won't get another warning." His breath caught. The paper shook slightly in his hands. There was no signature, no source, but the message was unmistakable. It wasn't just academic anymore. It was personal. As Devante reports the threat to campus security, a second envelope is discovered. This one left on Dr. Harkness's windshield, containing a photo of her with Devante in the hearing, crossed out in red marker. The first envelope had rattled him. The second one terrified everyone else. Dr. Harkness found it just before dawn, plastered to her windshield in the faculty lot. A grainy photograph of her and Devante sitting side by side during the hearing. both faces slashed through with a red marker X. No note. No explanation. Just the message. You're next. Campus police took the threats seriously, at least in language. In practice, it was bureaucracy in motion. Forms, signatures, vague reassurances. We'll increase patrols, they promised. But everyone on the inside knew what that meant. More lights. No answers. Devontae didn't sleep that night. He sat by his window, notebook open but untouched. The glow of his desk lamp painting him in the dull yellow of exhaustion. Outside, the quad was silent. The same silence that always seemed to follow chaos. Not peace, but the pause before another hit. By morning, word of the threats leaked to students. Some whispered it was fake, an attention ploy, a PR stunt, orchestrated by MIT to fuel the story. Others believed it completely. The divide that had begun in classrooms was now visible everywhere. The cafeteria, the library, online threads. Lines were drawn not by fact, but by fear. Dr. Harkness stopped driving to campus for a week. Hale stayed close, checking in on Devontae daily. But the university remained quiet. Careful, calculating, terrified of lawsuits and headlines. Then came the night that split everything open. It was late, past 1 a.m., and the library was nearly empty. The rain outside had turned heavy, beating rhythmically against the tall glass windows. Devontae sat in the corner near the math section, surrounded by empty coffee cups and sheets of scratch paper. He was building something, a new approach, something cleaner than the chaos he was living through. He wrote furiously, almost feverishly, numbers becoming his language again. Every stroke of his pen dulled the noise of the world. His notebook filled with new lines of thought, half equations, half survival. He didn't hear the footsteps until they stopped beside him. "Still proving you're smarter than the rest of us?" a voice said. He looked up slowly. Two figures stood there, both wearing hoodies pulled low, their faces shadowed. Devontae's heart steadied, but his expression didn't change. "The library's open to everyone," he said calmly. The taller one snorted. "Not for frauds." Devontae closed his notebook, marking his place with a paperclip. "You don't have to believe me," he said. "That's the beauty of truth. It doesn't need witnesses." "Big words," the shorter one sneered. "Maybe you can write those on your dorm door next time." He stood, ready to leave, but the taller student stepped in front of him, blocking his path. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, not hatred that burned hot, but the cold kind, learned and inherited. "You think people like you get to humiliate professors and walk away?" the voice said. "You think MIT really wants you, or do they just want your story?" Devontae didn't answer. He knew better than to argue with ghosts wearing skin. He moved past them, slowly, deliberately. Neither touched him, but the words followed him like footsteps. When he reached the door, he felt the cold rain slap against his face. Sudden cleansing. He pulled up his hood and started toward his dorm, each puddle reflecting distorted campus lights. Behind him, laughter echoed faintly. It wasn't loud. It was worse. Soft, satisfied. The walk back was only 5 minutes. It felt like miles. The campus was half asleep, the lampposts flickering under the storm. Devontae's footsteps splashed rhythmically, until they didn't, until a rustling sound made him stop. He turned. Empty walkway. But the sound was still there. Soft shoes on wet pavement, a whisper of motion too deliberate to be the wind. He walked faster. The shadows followed. By the time he reached his dorm building, he could hear them. The same muffled laughter, closer now. He pulled his keycard from his pocket, hands slick from the rain, and swiped. The red light blinked. "Deny." "Come on," he muttered. Trying again. Green. The door clicked, but before he could push it open, something hit him from behind. Not a punch, not a shove, just enough force to send him stumbling forward. His notebook slipped from his hand and splashed into a puddle. He turned, catching only shapes, dark hoodies, masks, the glint of a spray can. One of them hissed, "Say hi to your fans, genius." The hiss of aerosol filled the air. By the time they were gone, the rain had already started washing the red paint into long streaks down the door. But the word was still visible. Fraud. He didn't chase them. He didn't yell. He stood there, drenched, watching the color drip, until it looked almost like blood. Then he picked up his soaked notebook, pressed it to his chest, and walked inside. Campus police called it an unverified incident. No witnesses, no camera footage, no suspects. The paint, they said, could have been done by anyone. But Devontae's bruised shoulder told a different story. When Dr. Harkness saw him the next morning, she froze. What happened? They said it was unconfirmed, he replied quietly. Guess I imagined it. She clenched her fists. You can't let this slide. I'm not. His voice was steady. But I'm not going to fight them the way they want me to. Hale joined them later that afternoon. The administration's issuing another statement, he said grimly. They're using phrases like isolated incident and ongoing dialogue. Devontae laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dialogue doesn't fix rot. It just hides the smell. Harkness looked at him. Then what are you going to do? He paused, looked down at the notebook in his hands. Still stained from the puddle, its pages warped, ink blurred. But inside it was something new. A proof. Incomplete. Impossible. Maybe brilliant. I'm going to remind them who they tried to silence, he said. And I'm going to do it where everyone can see. By the end of that week, flyers appeared all over campus. Leave demonstration. Devontae Brooks to attempt solving a historically unsolved problem in mathematics. Open to the public Friday, 7 p.m., Langston Quad. The university tried to stop it. Unauthorized assembly, they called it. Potential safety concern. But the students had already claimed it as their own. Within hours, hashtags spread again. Dequation of justice. Devontae live. Truth on the board. Even news outlets announced they'd stream it live. When Hale found him the night before, he looked half worried, half amazed. You sure about this? He asked. You're putting yourself back in the fire. That's the point, Devontae said. They used the board to humiliate me. I'll use it to expose them. Hale studied him. What problem are you choosing? Devontae smiled faintly. The Euler-Lagrange unsolved form. 2 centuries old. Everyone gave up on it. That's not just math. That's a career killer. Or a truth maker, Devontae replied. And if I fail, at least I'll fail my way. The next evening, Langston Quad transformed. Rows of chairs. Temporary lighting. Cameras. Hundreds of students and faculty crowded the open space, umbrellas up against the drizzle. Some came to support. Others came to watch him fail. At the center stood a whiteboard under a spotlight, gleaming like a stage. Devontae stepped up wearing the same black hoodie he'd worn the day Creed humiliated him. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Dr. Harkness stood in the front row. Hale stood beside her. Even the dean came silent. Arms folded, reputation trembling. Devontae faced the crowd, then turned to the board. He picked up the marker. This, he said quietly, is the problem they said couldn't be solved. And maybe it can't. But if the last few months have taught me anything, it's that impossible doesn't mean wrong. It just means unwanted. The audience fell silent. Even the rain seemed to pause. He began to write. Line after line, his mind moving faster than his hand could keep up. The marker squeaked as numbers formed patterns. Patterns became pathways. He wasn't just solving, he was storytelling, using logic as rebellion, precision as protest. Each calculation built on the one before it, the crowd leaning closer with every shift. Minutes turned into an hour. The whiteboard filled. He stopped only once to look out at the crowd, breathing heavy, eyes bright with something that looked dangerously close to peace. Then, with one final stroke, he circled a section near the center. Right there, he said softly. That's where everyone stopped looking. They assumed symmetry. They shouldn't have. Hale's eyes widened. He understood immediately. Devontae hadn't solved it yet, but he'd found the flaw in the centuries-old foundation. The crowd erupted, some clapping, some shouting, all stunned. And then, silence again, because the cameras caught something else. Standing in the back, half hidden under an umbrella, was Dr. Creed, expression unreadable, phone in hand, recording. The next morning, an anonymous announcement circulates through the university's network. Proof invalid. Demonstration staged. Signed only WC. The morning after the demonstration, the university's network was flooded. An anonymous message circulated through internal faculty emails and public forums alike. Proof invalid. Demonstration staged. Student manipulated variables. Do not be deceived. WC. No attachments. No evidence. Just the accusation. It landed like a thunderclap. Some dismissed it immediately. Too obvious. Too desperate. Others clung to it, needing something to cling to, anything to reassert control over a narrative that had spun beyond them. But for Devontae Brooks, it didn't matter. He already knew what the day would bring. By 6:00 p.m., Langston Quad was transformed again, but this time the spectacle wasn't rumor-driven or student-run. Now it was organized. Covered by media, backed by cameras, extension cords, LED screens, university security, and MIT faculty live-streaming the event for mathematical review. Reporters lined the perimeter, professors sat in the first rows. Students packed in behind them, some standing, some perched on benches, and planters, some watching from the second-story windows of nearby buildings. Langston Hall, once a quiet tower of prestige and paper, had become the nucleus of a cultural earthquake, and at the center of it all stood Devante. Hoodie up, shoulders squared, staring at the massive whiteboard under a canopy of floodlights. It was clean, blank, infinite, just like the challenge he was about to confront. He turned to face the crowd, marker in hand, heart steady. This problem, he said, gesturing to the printed equation displayed on the board's corner, has existed for nearly 2 centuries. It appears in multiple derivations, most famously in the Euler-Lagrange branch of classical mechanics. But for all our computing power, for all our theory, it's remained resistant, unsolved. He let the pause linger. Tonight I'm not promising a solution, he added. I'm promising a search, one done in the open, with no shortcuts, no edits, and no apologies. He turned back to the board, began to write. The first line was a standard reformulation of the Euler-Lagrange equation. From there he moved quickly, but deliberately. He transformed the functional into its variational form, introduced a boundary condition previously proposed in a 1973 academic paper, then bypassed it with a novel substitution. Students in the crowd whispered. Professors leaned in. He was using their language, but translating it into something they had never seen. Half an hour passed. The board filled with nested integrals, strange symbols and compact notations stacked like scaffolding. Devante paused only to cap and uncap the marker. His breathing stayed even. The crowd, by contrast, grew restless, not with boredom but with awe. They were watching something rare, clarity in motion. Even Hale, seated near the front, had his phone out, taking photos not for memory but for documentation. And in the far corner of the quad, partially hidden behind a media truck, stood Dr. Wallace Creed, hands in his coat pockets, eyes locked on the board. Creed hadn't planned to attend. Not after the backlash. Not after the video. Not after being removed from the classroom, suspended from the faculty, and warned of a pending internal review. But he couldn't stay away. He had spent his life standing at the front of classrooms, holding markers, making young minds jump through the hoops of his own expectations. And now, all of it was being rewritten. Not in secret, not in academic journals, but under the blinding heat of stage lights, on a campus he once controlled. He had to see it, if only to confirm it wasn't real. He had to witness what he refused to believe. On stage, Devante reached the turning point. The crowd felt it. So did he. He erased a portion of the top right formula, replacing it with a tighter notation. His strokes grew more deliberate, slower. Then, without warning, he stopped completely, capped the marker, turned, and faced the crowd. I need you to follow this next part carefully, he said, voice louder now. Because this isn't about solving the equation anymore. People exchanged looks, phones lifted. What I found, he continued, isn't a solution. It's a flaw. Murmurs spread. Hale's eyes widened. Cameras zoomed in. Since 1852, Devante said, this problem has been built on a symmetrical boundary assumption that's been carried through derivations without question. Every paper since then has accepted it as fixed. But it's wrong. Not dramatically, subtly, just enough to throw off every proof that came after it. He turned back to the board and circled a single line of variable manipulation. Here, this is where it breaks. And this, he drew a new vector, is how you undo 2 centuries of error. Dead silence. Then a voice in the crowd asked, stunned, you're saying every published attempt was based on a false premise? No, Devante replied calmly. I'm saying they trusted a flawed foundation. And it's time we stop calling that brilliance. Another pause. Then, slowly, applause. Scattered at first, then building. Students clapped, then professors, then even the media. Devante didn't smile. He wasn't here for applause. He turned back to the whiteboard, and with steady hands, rewrote the problem from scratch. This time using the corrected boundary values. Line by line, the contradiction unraveled. It wasn't a full solution, but it was a rebirth, an academic exorcism, Far off, Creed stared at the board, face unreadable. This wasn't just about losing. This was about being unmasked. He pulled out his phone, stepped back behind the media truck, and typed a message into an encrypted app. Launch the rebuttal. Post the review. Tag the forums. Use W. Then he slipped away, unnoticed. Hours later, as the event wrapped and the live stream ended, the social media wave returned. Clips of Devante's pause. What I found isn't a solution. It's a flaw. Spread like wildfire. The hashtag shifted again. Flawed foundations. Devante challenge. Rewrite the equation. Scholars reposted his chalkboard. High school teachers used it as an example of questioning norms. Activists merged it with slogans about racial equity in education. He was no longer just a student. He was a symbol of what academia feared and needed most: disruption. But the next morning, just as the campus celebrated, the first crack reappeared. An anonymous document uploaded to multiple math forums and faculty blogs. Title: A Staged Demonstration. A review of Devante Brooks' derivation. It accused him of altering the original equation, claiming his derivation was invalid, calling it performance, not proof. The author? WC. A thinly veiled mask. No one needed decoded. Creed had struck back. And this time he didn't use a classroom. He used doubt. As Devante prepares to publish his step-by-step rebuttal, he receives a direct message from a stranger. Creed's not working alone. Check your email. Tonight, the direct message arrived at 3:17. Creed's not working alone. Check your email. Tonight. Devante stared at it, bleary-eyed, the blue glow of his phone casting shadows on his face. He tapped back into his inbox. There, in bold, was a new message from a burner address. No subject, no body, just a single PDF attachment titled Internal Kin PDF. He hesitated for a moment, then opened it. Inside were a series of screenshots. Emails between Dr. Wallace Creed and two unnamed faculty members. One of them referencing a private meeting called regarding containment of the Devante issue. Another discussed shaping the narrative through academic review platforms. And a third referenced suppressing online traction before it metastasizes. The words weren't blunt. They were cautious. Coded. But the intent was unmistakable: silence him, discredit him, and protect the institution. One line chilled Devante most. If the math stands, we adjust the framework. If it doesn't, we eliminate the noise. He sat back in his chair, breath shallow. It wasn't just Creed's pride at stake. It was the university's reputation. His proof hadn't just challenged a mathematical standard. It had exposed a systemic failure in how genius was defined, recognized, and protected. He now understood the scale of what he was truly up against. But fear didn't settle in. Conviction did. By noon the next day, Devante released a full breakdown of his demonstration. It wasn't flashy, no color, no clickbait. Just a clean 23-page PDF titled, Dissecting the Flaw, a formal re-examination of the Euler-Lagrange premise. He posted it publicly. No paywall, no gatekeeping. Included were raw calculations, time-stamped draft pages, and a comparison between his derivation and every major paper written on the problem since 1904. He named no one, blamed no one. He just let the math speak, and speak it did. Within 48 hours, the document was downloaded over 1.3 million times. Researchers from Oxford, Princeton, Caltech, and CERN published initial reactions, not just praising the work, but revisiting the problem with Devante's corrections as a new standard. A Brazilian physicist tweeted, "I've worked on this problem since 1998. This student didn't solve it, he reframed it. That's harder and rarer." A professor from Tokyo Institute of Technology posted, "We've been orbiting the same wrong sun for decades. Devante built a new galaxy." The live stream of his demonstration hit 5.6 million views in 3 days. He became the most Googled name in STEM that week. But Devante didn't celebrate. He didn't do interviews. "You know you're international now, right?" she said, sitting across from him. "I know," he replied, still scribbling. "You've redefined a cornerstone of applied math." "I didn't do it for them." She nodded. "But they saw it." "I'm glad they did. Now I can get back to work." She smiled. "You are a rare kind of brilliant, Devante. Not because you're right, but because you're still grounded in the pain that made you study." He looked up at her. "Pain was my teacher before any of you were." The university could no longer contain the fallout. Following the anonymous leak of internal emails, which had now been confirmed by independent cybersecurity auditors, Public trust in the administration began to unravel. Faculty petitions demanded transparency. Alumni threatened to freeze donations. The dean's office released a formal statement promising full cooperation with the independent ethics review panel. But nothing had the weight of what came next. The office of the provost issued a one-line bulletin at 8:47 a.m. on Monday. Effective immediately, Dr. Wallace Creed is placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation into allegations of professional misconduct. It was official. Dr. Hale joined him, holding 2 coffees. They placed him on leave. Hale said, "It's the beginning." Devante didn't answer. He opened it. Inside was a revised offer. Not just for admission. A named fellowship. Full funding. Housing. A seat on a research team. And something else. "We would like to formally invite you to co-author a paper with our theoretical division, to revisit unresolved cases where symmetry assumptions may be flawed. We believe your perspective is needed, not as a student but as a thinker." Devante folded the letter and placed it in his notebook. "You're quiet," Hale said. "That's the best academic offer I've seen in 20 years. "I'm grateful," Devante replied. "But I'm still thinking about the others." "The others?" "The names I saw in Creed's file. The students who didn't get this ending." Hale nodded solemnly. "You can't carry all of them. I'm not trying to, but I'm not going to pretend I'm the only one who deserved better." Later that week, a symposium was held in Devante's honor. Hastily organized, student-led, packed with faculty and news outlets. They named it Beyond the Board. Rethinking Genius, Gatekeeping, and the Future of Math. Devante agreed to speak, but under one condition. He wouldn't lecture. He would tell the story of every line that led to the night he broke the board. Every moment of invisibility. Every time someone looked past him. Every dollar he didn't have. Every place he had to teach himself in silence. He ended his talk with one sentence. "The system didn't make me. It tried to erase me. I solved for the remainder." It became the quote of the year. Printed on posters. Posted in classrooms. Whispered by students of color in whispered defiance. That night he returned to his dorm for the last time.
His things were already packed.
MIT's program began in 2 weeks. But on his bed sat a small envelope. No name. Inside a handwritten note. "You won the equation. But the system still has variables." And below it, a single address scribbled in red ink. An off-campus storage unit registered in Dr. Creed's name. Devante stands in front of the locked storage unit that night, key in hand, unaware that what lies inside will finally reveal how deep the sabotage truly ran, and who ordered it. The storage unit was colder than expected. Devante stood inside its narrow corridor, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like distant warnings. In his hand, the university-issued key clicked as it turned in the rusted padlock. When the steel door groaned open, the stale air that rushed out smelled of dust and old documents. Secrets no longer wanted, but not quite destroyed. Inside was no furniture, no math books, just a small metal filing cabinet, and 2 boxes stacked on top. Devante paused. His mind spun back to the note left on his bed. "You won the equation. But the system still has variables." He opened the top box. Inside were folders. Dozens. All labeled with last names. Some familiar, some not. A few immediately stood out. Brooks, T. Jameson, A. Herrera, C. Morris. He pulled out the one labeled Jameson. Inside, typed records. A disciplinary complaint from 2016 filed by a black student athlete, claiming Dr. Creed had accused him of cheating on an open book exam. The internal response: case dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Another file: Herrera, a Latina woman, top of her class. Her grade was dropped from an A to a C after she questioned a rubric error. Her appeal letter was included, highlighted in red ink, with the word emotional, written in the margins. Devante's hands trembled. These weren't just mistakes. They were patterns. The bottom drawer of the cabinet was locked. Devante found the second key taped to the underside of the drawer above it. Inside were envelopes, payouts, university-sealed documents, signatures, settlement agreements, from former students. Most had confidentiality clauses. All were about academic grievances involving bias, retaliation, or intimidation. He pulled one at random and read the closing clause. The university agrees to settle for $25,000 contingent upon no further legal action or public disclosure of said events. The date, the signature, Dr. Wallace Creed. Devante backed away. This wasn't just Dr. Creed's darkness. It was the university's complicity. A paper trail of silence paid and archived. And then at the very back of the drawer, he found it. His own name, Brooks D. He opened the file slowly. Inside wasn't anything he had submitted. It was a transcript, altered. A version of his admissions folder missing the letter from Miss Alder. Instead, it included a copy of a report from his old caseworker, flagged with a note, unstable social background. Monitor closely. Another memo dated just before he arrived. Suggested limited classroom exposure. Not recommended for lab placements or public fellowships until observed. He blinked in disbelief. They had marked him before he ever entered the classroom. The next morning, Langston's student newspaper published a story that shocked the campus. The Creed Files. A decade of silenced students. The byline belonged to Maya Dillard, a quiet second-year journalism major, who had received the anonymous tip the same night Devante received the storage unit key. What she published wasn't just damning, it was a systemic expo. Her article outlined over a dozen incidents spanning 13 years, each involving a minority student, who had filed complaints against Dr. Creed, only for their cases to vanish, get resolved privately, or never reach the board at all. Maya's story included screenshots of internal emails, documents of secret settlements, and redacted reports obtained through a now-discovered loophole in the university's old digital archive system. Her most shocking line: Dr. Creed wasn't just a professor, he was a gatekeeper to elitism, one the university willingly empowered to keep certain students in check. The article went viral before sunrise. That same day, CNN, MSNBC, and The Atlantic reached out for interviews, but Maya declined. Instead, she walked straight into Devante's dorm that evening and said, "This wasn't just your fight, but your bravery gave us a trail to follow." He nodded slowly, his voice quiet. "I didn't want to become a movement. But you are one," she said, "and the school knows it." At an emergency faculty meeting later that week, the president of the university addressed the situation with scripted solemnity. "There are times when institutions must confront their failures, not just in policy but in culture," she said. "We failed to act when warnings came. We allowed oversight to become indifference, and we allowed brilliant minds to be belittled in the name of academic tradition. It was polished. It was too late. Students demanded more. They began organizing teach-ins, not just about Devante's treatment, but about racism in higher education. Scholars flew in to speak. Civil rights attorneys volunteered to consult pro bono. Students printed Maya's article and papered the walls of Langston Hall with it. And at the center of the storm stood Devante. Not gloating, not angry, just steady, still doing math, still calculating futures the system hadn't predicted. Hale met him outside the administration building one afternoon, holding 2 folders. "The Department of Education is now involved," he said. "They're investigating your case as part of a larger inquiry into civil rights violations across state-funded universities." Devante nodded. "It's bigger than Creed." "It always was," Hale replied. "But now you've got leverage. Your story opened a door, and they want you to walk through it." He handed over a letter. "Invitation to testify. State Board of Education." Devante stared at it. "Testify? They're holding a special session, looking into discrimination patterns in admissions and academic discipline. They want you to speak."
"I'm not a lawyer."
"They don't want a lawyer," Hale said. "They want the student who brought a system to its knees with a marker and a board." That night, Devante sat alone in the quad, the wind cool against his skin, the air thick with something not quite fear, something deeper, a question. Could he represent more than himself? Would they listen? Was the system even ready? Dr. Harkness joined him without speaking at first. She simply sat beside him, both staring at the darkened tower of Langston Hall. "You know," she finally said, "there was a time when I was just like you, too quiet, too determined, too black for the department I was hired into." Devante turned to her. "They didn't call it racism," she continued. "They called it not fitting in. Too unorthodox. Sound familiar?" He smiled sadly. "I stayed because I knew one day someone would come through that door and shake the whole damn thing. And I wanted to be here when it happened." "I didn't mean to shake anything," he said. "Good revolutions never do," she replied. "They just solve for X, and everything after that changes." As Devante prepares for his testimony, a new leak hits the press. A private university memo, revealing a confidential list of watchlist students, including names flagged for background complications. His is at the top. The hearing chamber in the state capitol was not like any classroom Devante Brooks had ever entered. High ceilings arched overhead, Wood paneling stretched wide, and rows of seats filled with legislators, education officials, journalists, and cameras formed an audience far larger than any lecture hall he had known. He sat at the witness table, a water glass trembling slightly before him, the microphone's red light glowing steadily. Across the room, the banner above declared, State Board of Education Special Session on Academic Equity in Higher Education. Devante glanced once at the gallery, then fixed his eyes straight ahead. He felt the weight of every past slur, every silent assumption, every time someone in academia had glanced past him. But he also felt something else, a kind of calm arrival. He had walked from back row anonymity to this room. He had carried notes, evidence, his notebooks, and his truth. Tonight, he wasn't just speaking for himself. The chairperson cleared her throat and addressed the panel. Mr. Brooks, when you are ready, you may begin your testimony. The room hushed, the only sound the low hum of electronics, the scribble of pens, the soft shuffle of paperwork. Devante took a slow breath, lifted his shoulders, and began. My name is Devante Brooks. I am a mathematician in training, a former foster youth, and a student who sat in the back row of Calculus 2 at Langston Hall, where I was repeatedly singled out, questioned and humiliated not for what I could not do, but for what no one expected I could. His voice trembled a little at first, then steadied. I wasn't supposed to win. I wasn't supposed to be here. But that expectation did not stop me. It galvanized me. He paused and looked out at the panel and gallery, letting his words sink. For a moment there was silence. One legislator wiped his eyes. A teacher choked back tears. The cameras panned. I stand here, Devante continued, because countless students like me never had the chance, the folder they tucked away, the comment they dismissed, the professor who assumed they would fail before they tried. I sat back because I knew that invisibility often kept you safe, and I raised my hand because invisibility cost me my dignity. I raised it because the question at the board was never whether I could learn calculus, but whether I deserved to learn. And if the curriculum, the culture, the system itself says no before you even start, then you already lost. He opened a binder and laid out photographs of documents, the secret watch list file from his admissions, the internal email showing the attempted framing, the video of the professor laughing. The hearing's large screen displayed each slide in high resolution. Some in the audience gasped, others looked away. One paper after another, he said. They baked in assumptions of who belonged in math, who belonged in the lab, who belonged in the front row. They rewarded conformity, not curiosity. They honored pedigree, not promise. And when I solved the equation, not just any problem, but a problem the elite considered resigned to history, I didn't just solve it for myself. I solved it for every student told they didn't belong. The murmurs rose. A few legislators leaned forward. A reporter scribbled furiously. A teacher in the gallery whispered, "That's my class." Devante's voice became firmer. This is not just about talent. It is about access. It is about the silence we treat as consent. It is about the arrogance of standards that assume one size fits all. And yes, it is about race. Because when your zip code is invisible, when your backpack carries thrift store jeans, when your seat is at the back, you may learn calculus. But they won't see you. They'll see everything but you. He tapped the documents. The code of conduct said fairness. But fairness in silence is still a hand on the throat. The open book test they made impossible. The problem they claimed you copied. The file they built to prove you unworthy. All of it designed to conserve power, not distribute it. Some in the audience sobbed softly. A lawmaker pressed his thumb to his lips and nodded. Devante paused, letting the moment swell. A reporter asked from the gallery, "Mr. Brooks, what do you want this board to do?" The microphone extended to Devante. He looked at the questioner, then back at the panel. "I want you to rebuild the system so that no student ever has to fight visibility the way I did," he said. "I want metrics that measure opportunity, not just achievement. I want professors trained, not just in subject matter, but in presence, knowing not only who is sitting, but why. I want transparency when someone is placed on a watch list, when complaints are buried, when privilege is preserved at the cost of promise." He paused again. "I don't want pity. I don't want special treatment. I want the system to recognize what I already recognized: I belong." A hush swept the room. The air was thick with promise and pressure. Then the chairperson spoke. "Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Brooks. We will now proceed to questions from the committee." The first questions were calm, measured. A senator asked about his results at MIT. Another asked about how he prepared for this moment in foster care. An education commissioner asked what the university's responsibilities should be. Devante answered each honestly, each time circling back to his core message: belonging, visibility, and reform. Then came the unexpected twist. The last question. Mr. Brooks, your mathematical solution changed the way your problem was approached. Yet opponents claim it was a public demonstration, not peer-reviewed. How do you justify its academic validity in this hearing context? Devante closed his binder and looked steadily at the camera. My proof is still under peer review. But validity isn't only defined in journals. Validity is defined in truth. He leaned forward. You may delay recognition, you may question the process, you may invalidate me, but what you cannot do is erase the question: who gets to decide what counts? He stepped back. The cameras zoomed in. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if on cue, applause rose from the gallery. Students, teachers, some lawmakers, not out of spectacle, but out of recognition. Outside, the live-streamed video broke records. Comments poured in. He just nailed it. Finally, someone said it. How many before him? Social media spun into motion. Gen Z hashtags trended worldwide. News tickers carried his quotes. And in this moment, Devante did what he had promised. He didn't just survive, he confronted. Later that evening, he returned to his dorm, the sun long gone. The building was quiet. He sat at his desk and sifted through his phone. Messages, congratulatory, supportive, thousands of them. He read only a few. He deleted some. He left others unread. He closed the phone. There was a knock. Dr. Hale entered, closing the door softly behind him. He held a sealed envelope. Devante, Hale said, voice low, you've done more tonight than solve a proof. You made people believe change is possible. Devante looked up. What's this? Hale handed him the envelope. Invitation. National Education Equity Commission. They want you. Devante's heart thundered. He set the envelope aside, reaching for his water glass. He drank slowly, then placed the glass down. Hale sat across from him. It's not a token. They want you to co-lead, to shape policy. Devante's face was unreadable. I accepted the MIT offer. But this could change thousands of students, not just one. Hale nodded. Exactly. Devante inhaled the quiet of the room. He thought of all the nights he'd spent alone in libraries, of the hidden folders and the door slammed on his potential. He thought of the students beginning to speak up, of the petitions and teach-ins and viral posts, and he thought of one simple truth. He wasn't done. The envelope remained on his desk, glowing softly under the lamplight. As Devante places the invitation into his notebook, his phone buzzes with a single message: we will not watch, we will act. The sun rose over Cambridge, with an unfamiliar courtesy for Devante Brooks. He stepped onto the campus of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, not as a freshman carrying uncertainty, but as a guest researcher, with a mission. The gray stone and glass of the institution, once remote and intimidating, now felt like terrain he had mapped himself, line by line. He carried his past like a blueprint, not a burden. In his first week, he walked through corridors lined with recognitions and portraits of mathematicians. 2 weeks later, he walked past them with students calling him by his first name. He taught informal workshops, held office hours for kids who never thought someone like him could be a teacher, and held one-on-one sessions with Black youth in STEM programs. He didn't smile for cameras. He shaped futures. In the days that followed, Devante founded the Brooks Math Mentorship Foundation. It began small, 25 high school students, mostly Black or Latinx, many from foster care, many from homes with no internet. He flew them into Cambridge for weekend calculus boot camps, provided used laptops, funded room and board, and paired each with graduate students as mentors. He spoke to them about limits, derivatives, and integrals, but also about identity, invisibility, and what it meant to not just find the solution, but to show up in the room where the solution was debated. The foundation's annual scholarship drew national attention. Media outlets wrote articles. From foster home to MIT, the Devante Brooks Scholarship, how one quiet math genius became a leader for the invisible. But Devante never let the cameras define him. He still wore thrifted jeans, comfortable hoodies, no designer logos. He didn't speak about the injustice he'd endured unless asked. Instead, every speech ended with the same line: I solve for the remainder. His board meeting once convened in a sleek MIT conference room. He looked out at his team, PhD candidates, corporate sponsors, alumni, nonprofit directors, and thought about the moment when he had sat in the back row of a calc class, silently solving everything they thought he couldn't. The roles had reversed. Now he chaired the table. He also launched the annual Hidden Equations competition, a contest for students who had been overlooked in their schools, who lacked AP classes or math clubs, but solved problems in basements, garages, public libraries. The winner received full tuition to attend MIT's summer research program, published alongside faculty. The first winner was from a rural Mississippi school, with no calculus. Devontae came by video link that summer, and told them you were solving problems the world forgot to ask. Welcome. The media loved the narrative, but Devontae reserved his satisfaction for the letters. A high schooler's email. When I solved the integral, I heard my grandmother say I was never dumb again. A foster child's note. You gave me a seat at the board even though I wasn't invited. Those letters meant more than headlines. In a public lecture at MIT, Devontae spoke to a packed auditorium. Talent isn't rare, recognition is. I didn't change when I got here. The room did. The room remained silent. He paused, then added, and someone has to carry the door open after you leave. The applause that followed wasn't empty. It echoed across time, but he never forgot the bruise-colored corridor of the university where he had been accused. He still carried the photo of the whiteboard that started it all, tucked inside his notebook, and before each foundation event, he visited the archive room in MIT's library, pulled out old journals, old essays, old assumptions. He searched for the invisible friction points. He asked questions other researchers didn't think to ask. When students of his foundation complained that university administrators still treated them like anomalies, he didn't offer quick fixes. He organized policy roundtables. He met with deans. He offered curriculum reviews. He asked each administrator, what if the equation didn't assume your student didn't belong? What if we built it when everyone belonged? At his most human moment, he sat with his old friend and mentor, Lila Weston, in a cafe near campus. She sipped hot chocolate. He stirred black coffee. She looked at him and said, you ever think you're doing too much? That maybe you deserved rest? He smiled softly. Rest is for people who weren't running from a lecture hall. She laughed. Fair. But she added quietly, you know, you're not just helping kids. You're changing an industry. He shrugged. An industry changed anyway. But I'll stay when it quits calling it innovation and starts calling it justice. Over time, the foundation grew. The board expanded. Corporate sponsors arrived, replacing older donors who had only supported traditional math outreach. Newspaper headlines shifted. Trailblazer. Game changer. Even the man who rewrote the back row. Yet when the cameras asked about his journey, Devontae always said, I didn't rewrite anything. I uncovered what was already right. Closer to home, the Foundation's summer residency in Cambridge became transformative. Students from neighborhoods where schools lacked textbooks now stayed in dorms, used MIT labs, published in journals. One group solved a variant of the problem Devontae had highlighted at the public event. They credited him. He said simply, you solved your equation. I just handed you the whiteboard. Still, something nagged at him. The system had shifted, but the roots remained. In one board meeting, a young research fellow asked, what about faculty behaviors? Devontae agreed. But he pressed further, what about the files they keep? The assumptions they embed? The doors they never unlock? He shook his head. Math is pure. Academia is not. And he knew why. What Dr. Creed had tried was not just personal. It was structural. A blueprint of bias. The settlement files, the watch lists, they weren't anomalies. They were templates. In a private moment at MIT's rooftop garden, he stared out at the Charles River, Cambridge lights shimmering, water flowing beneath. He held the letter offering him a named fellowship and board seat. He thought of Atlanta, of foster care, of hours alone in donation box libraries, and he felt the weight of every student he now carried. On a brisk autumn afternoon, reporters gathered outside MIT's newest research building to photograph him with students of the foundation. Flashes popped, cameras clicked, but when the shutter settled, his eyes were on the students, the ones who looked like him, who came from where he did, the ones he had promised, you belong. And then came the unexpected twist. Long after the press conference, just as he was packing his phone into his bag, a university journalist approached him. Devontae, she said quietly, you should know, I uncovered that one of your foundation's major corporate sponsors recently donated to Dr. Creed's legal defense fund. Devante's heart skipped a beat. The smile left his face. He stared at her. Why? She shrugged. They said they backed innovation. But when Creed surfaced again, he had secretly lobbied a board of trustees. They transferred continuing sums. For a moment, Devante felt the old invisibility creep in. The kind that whispered, maybe you're only as safe as the money behind you. He nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. She walked away. Devante stared at the pavement. The river still flowed, but nothing felt steady. He whispered to himself, clear the room, build the model. But watch the funding. Months later, he sat in a board meeting of the foundation. A donor questioned whether the foundation should expand into research just like MAT. Another questioned whether the foundation should appoint minority faculty rather than just students. Devante listened. Then he stood. I will never ask these students to carry what they didn't create, he said firmly. We're not expanding to match prestige. We're expanding to match possibility. And if our funding ever ties us to someone who made them invisible, we will return it. We will close the check, not because of money but because of trust. Silence met his words. Then applause. He sat back down. The night closed. The city lights reflected in his coffee. He still felt the bruise in his chest, but now it was tempered by momentum. He had moved from target to trailblazer. He had changed the equation. And yet, as he left the meeting and walked to his car, he paused in front of the MIT building, bearing the name of a former professor. He thought of the inventory of files, the victims, the protocols still unexposed. He clenched his fist and said softly, we're just getting started. Years later, Dr. Wallace Creed applies for a job at an institute where Devante now sits on the board. The office was quiet, beyond the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant shuffle of papers from other board members. Devante Brooks sat behind a wide mahogany desk at the institution where he now held influence. The sunlight through the tall windows of the boardroom cast long shadows across the table. In front of him lay a single folder, the application of Dr. Wallace Creed, a man who once tried to destroy him, now seeking redemption. Devante opened the folder slowly, his fingers brushing the top sheet. Creed's cover letter. I wish to serve, to teach again, to learn. The CV followed. Years of service, publications shrinking, and admissions of fault not loudly proclaimed but implied through tone. The reference letters had been replaced, titles and affiliations faded. It was a humbled document. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his hoodie and casual wear, replaced by a quiet professionalism. The weight of power rested in his hands now. The tables had turned. The same professor who had humiliated him, dismissed him, accused him, now requested something from him. His mind drifted back to the beginning. The back row desk in Langston Hall, the humiliation, the watch list, the secret files. He remembered the angle of Creed's smirk when he was asked to solve the problem. He remembered the doubt in every student's eyes as Devante wrote. He remembered the red paint on his door, the threats, the leaks, the system that said you don't belong here. And now here he was, with choices. Devante picked up his phone and sent a brief message. Board assembled, we'll review in 1 hour. He rose and walked to the window. Outside, the campus moved, students walking, cars passing, leaves falling. He thought about legacy. He thought about power. He thought about justice, not revenge. When the board convened, Creed entered. He paused halfway, noticing Devante at the head of the table. Creed's shoulders were slightly slumped. His eyes flicked to the folder. There was no confrontation, no flourish. Just two men at opposite places of history. Devante rose. Dr. Creed, he said, his voice calm, controlled. Thank you for appearing. Creed nodded. Thank you for considering my application. Devante gestured to a seat opposite. Please have a seat. Creed sat. Silence, stretched. The board members shuffled their materials. Devante cleared his throat. I've reviewed your application. I've read your cover letter. I've seen your references. I've weighed your contributions and your failure. Creed's expression remained impassive, but something moved in his eyes. Devante continued. I also remember that, years ago, you challenged me in a public forum. You accused my work of plagiarism. You denied my presence. You tried to make me small. His tone was even. What you did was not simply academic oversight. It was a misuse of your authority. You leveraged your position to protect the system that you designed. That system cost students like me, and many more, years of invisibility. Creed did not attempt to interrupt. He nodded. Once. Devante took a breath. I am not here for revenge. I will not turn this into a spectacle. But I will not allow this moment to pass without purpose. He leaned forward. I will grant your application, but with condition. Creed's face tightened. You will teach here, Devante said slowly. You will mentor students who have been historically excluded. You will sit on the same board that oversees our foundation and admissions reform, to dismantle the protocols you once upheld. You will apologize publicly, not privately, to every student who filed a complaint, whose records were hidden, whose voice was silenced under your watch. Creed swallowed. I understand. And, Devante added, you will submit an annual report, transparent, public, on your mentoring, your cases, your students, progress reports, not evaluations by the department, but by us, the community you harmed. He paused. Fail to meet these obligations, and we revoke your appointment. Your teaching license will be reviewed. Your references will be rescinded. Silence again. Creed nodded slowly. I accept your terms. Devante closed the folder. The weight lifted slightly. Board members shifted, looked at each other. Some smiled, some were quiet. Power had changed hands, but the work had just begun. In the weeks that followed, Devante kept his hands busy. He didn't brag, he built. The Foundation's mentorship program expanded. He opened satellite campuses in cities that rarely saw calculus honors programs. He offered virtual labs, summer research projects, and opportunities. He spoke less about what he had overcome, and more about what others could become. He visited Atlanta once. He talked to foster care agencies. He visited the public library, where he once read textbooks waiting for internet that never came. He sat at the desk where he had scribbled proofs under the glow of a borrowed lamp. He told the children, you don't have to be noticed to begin. You only have to be ruthless with your own promise. His image appeared in magazines, but he stayed grounded, because he remembered what it meant to be unseen. One afternoon, at the Foundation's annual gala, a student he'd mentored made the keynote speech. She wore his hoodie. She told her story, from a trailer home to her first research paper published with MIT. She spoke of debt, doubt, and the single night, when she raised the marker and solved the step no one taught her. Devante sat in the front row. Tears welled. Not because of his success, but because of the circles completed, the systems challenged, the voices amplified. Later, behind the scenes, Creed approached him. Devante, he said softly, I want to thank you. Devante nodded. You're welcome. Creed hesitated. More than that, I mean it. Devante offered a small smile. Then let's get to work. Months later, a documentary crew followed Devante through his day, advising students, meeting with Foundation staff, walking across MIT's campus, stopping at the building named after a math pioneer who never went to college. The title, Solving for Belonging. At one point, the camera trailed him into a classroom. He entered quietly. The seats were filled with young black math prodigies he had recruited. Some wore hoodies. Some wore sweatshirts. Some had never worn ties before. Some had never walked into a STEM lab before. The classroom was alive. Questions blazed. Laughter between breakthroughs. Calculators. Laptops. Whiteboards. The professor, one of Devante's former mentees, looked to him, smiled, and nodded. Devante stepped to the front, marker in hand. He wrote a simple equation.
Hope, opportunity, the outcome.
He looked at the students. The world will ask you to prove you belong. Don't. Let the equation show it. The students nodded. They lined up to solve problems he placed on the board. Each one touched the board in turn. Confident now, visible now. The camera panned slowly across the class. Young black students, Latinx students, first-gen students, all engaged, all seen. And then the documentary cut to Devante standing under the MIT quad lights at dusk. He looked at his phone. One message. Board meeting scheduled. Creed's case file. Minutes attached. He looked up at the building windows. He thought of origin, of promise, of power. The story seemed to close. But change is never closed. It's a loop. Years later, because this is what time does, Dr. Wallace Creed applied for a new position at an institute where Devante now sat on the board. A subtle but seismic shift. Creed seeking a place where power once sat firmly under his robes, now asking the board of the man he once harmed. Devante held the file in his hand. He didn't flinch. He didn't grin. He didn't seek revenge. He studied the document. He studied Creed's past, the conditions of acceptance, the promises implied. And then he did something no one expected. He wrote a note, placed it in the file, and set it aside. Because forgiveness wasn't weakness. Power wasn't ego. Legacy was the draw that remained. He signed the note. Approved contingent on full transparency. Let's move the system forward. The door closed behind him. The camera pans across a bright classroom. Devante stands before a sea of young black math prodigies. The marker pauses above the whiteboard, the equation waiting. The students watch him. Present, visible, empowered. He writes, rewrite the variables. Define your own constants. He steps back. The frame holds. A final shot of their faces. Hope, curiosity, determination. And the screen fades. No one should have to solve equations just to prove their humanity. Devante's story isn't rare, it's just the one that got caught on camera. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or misjudged for simply existing, type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.